Hello. Today, while the ceasefire takes hold in Gaza, we consider the long-term effects of 2 years of war. In Assisi in Italy, we meet the pilgrims queuing to pay their respects to the first millennial saint. In Haiti, we hear how criminal gangs are still in control of the capital, Port-au-Prince. And finally, many people around the world embrace their Irish heritage and dream of a return home. We're on the south coast of Ireland to hear more about the allure of the Emerald Isle. But first, President Donald Trump received a hero's welcome when he landed in Israel this week, following his central role in brokering the Gaza ceasefire and hostage exchange. During his whirlwind trip, he also flew to the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, where he declared an historical turning point to the gathered world leaders. Mr. Trump even suggested everlasting peace in the region, though we're short on detail on just how that might proceed over the coming weeks, months and years. Our U.S. State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, was on board Air Force One with the president as he flew into Tel Aviv.
If journalism is a front row seat to history, I got 3,000 years of it this week as the BBC's turn came up for a seat on Air Force One. President Trump was proclaiming an end to war after 3 millennia in the world's most combustible region. With that characteristically vivid overstatement, we set out on a journey that turned out to be a diplomatic tornado. I had 24 hours up close to the leader declaring, as the giant billboard above him in Egypt proclaimed, "Peace in the Middle East." The trip started with what the White House calls a gaggle, a mini press conference on the fly, as Mr. Trump came to the back of the plane to talk to us, the press. Every country is dancing in the streets, he said of the hostage and prisoner exchange he brokered between Israel and Hamas. I pressed him on whether the ceasefire in Gaza would hold. He was confident it would. But he glossed over the really big questions about what comes next, how to secure and govern the territory. As we barreled towards Tel Aviv, Air Force One did a flyby of the beach. It dipped a wing so we could get a view of a giant mural painted on the ground saying thank you to Trump, a picture of his profile and the Israeli flag. The maneuver set the mood. This was a victory lap, more than negotiations over Phase 2 for Gaza's future. In Israel, the motorcade zoomed to Jerusalem. As hostages held by Hamas were being exchanged for Palestinian prisoners who'd been held in Israeli jails, tears of relief broke out among anxious families. In the Israeli parliament, the mood was raucous. Spectators shouted from the gallery behind me, "Thank you, Trump," as he entered. Lawmakers hammered their desks. He hailed a historic dawn and expected it to stay that way. Israel, he told them, had won all it could by force of arms. As Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu watched on, there was only one man in charge here. Mr. Trump gestured to Israel's President Isaac Herzog and told him he should pardon Mr. Netanyahu, who is on trial accused of taking bribes and luxury gifts, which he denies. "Cigars and champagne," exclaimed Trump dismissively. "Who the hell cares about that?" President Trump is a person who seems to think in pictures, in preference to words. The details involved in ending decades of intractable conflict, military occupation, and spirals of attacks and revenge seem to preoccupy him less than what it will look like. Peace, as he sees it, is an image, one of gleaming oceanside towers, lives saved, and him being presented the Nobel Peace Prize. Later on, as we boarded the plane again, this time for Egypt, I pressed him on whether he was proclaiming peace for this entire region prematurely. I sensed the question irritated him, and he threw it back at me, saying I was suggesting more people should die. "What do you want? Another 300,000-400,000 people to be killed? Is that what you're looking for?" No, this would work, he argued, because he had real power and wealth on his side in the form of the Gulf Arab leaders. We soon descended towards Sharm el-Sheikh, where Egyptian F-16s escorted us into land. They were so close I could see the fighter pilots moving in their cockpits, the ultimate show for the president who loves displays of military might. On the ground next to President Sisi, Mr. Trump praised the man he once reportedly called his favorite dictator. Shaking hands with the Egyptian leader, he said of Sisi, "This is a very powerful man. They have no crime in Egypt. You put it out before it starts." Egypt has been roundly condemned by rights groups for criminalizing dissent and locking up opponents. Mr. Trump's comments were quickly picked up by media in the US, where he has sent National Guard troops into cities, he says, to stem crime. In Sharm, world leaders filled the room for the ultimate picture. They lined up in the background as Mr. Trump took to the podium beneath his Peace in the Middle East slogan. He said it had taken 3,000 years to get here. I reflected on the realities on the ground. Amid today's joyous reunions and fragile truce, there was grief, destruction and distrust, and no agreed plan to secure Gaza. Peace in the Middle East is a vision, but for now Mr. Trump was the only one really seeing it.
Tom Bateman. Next, as the dust settles following the ceasefire agreement, one of the unresolved questions is what'll happen next? And what are the hopes for a bigger breakthrough in establishing long-term peace between Israelis and Palestinians? Jeremy Bowen reflects on this moment in the decades-long debate and whether there will ever be reconciliation.
History is unavoidable in this part of the world. It lives, breathes, and intrudes into the present in a way that I've rarely seen elsewhere in many years of looking. Before I came back to Jerusalem this time round, I did some texting with my friend Eugene Rogan. He's Professor of Modern Middle Eastern History at the University of Oxford. We exchanged messages about where the 7th of October attacks by Hamas and Israel's response over the last 2 years fit into the long sweep of the conflict. In 1948, Israel won its independence war and created a state. In 1967, Israel captured the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. That meant it controlled all of historic Palestine. Eugene and I agreed that 2023, in its own way, marked as important a turning point in the conflict as 1948 and 67. The last 2 horrific years have stripped it back to its essentials. It comes down to possession of the land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. The Israeli government has dropped the careful language that even Benjamin Netanyahu has used in the past about the idea of Palestinian statehood. In a speech in 2009, for the first time, he said he could accept a Palestinian state with conditions, including being demilitarized. Now, the Prime Minister, with the support of most Israelis, according to opinion polls, says repeatedly that Israel will never permit Palestinian independence. Not only would it open itself up to another 7th of October, but also, he says, the land belongs to the Jews. A month ago, Mr. Netanyahu went to Ma'ale Adumim, a Jewish settlement on occupied land just outside Jerusalem that pushes down into the Judean desert towards the Dead Sea. He was there to announce a massive expansion of the settlement, and he said once again that there will never be a Palestinian state. This place is ours. If Israel keeps all the occupied territories, it also keeps the Palestinians that live there who want freedom. That wouldn't just continue and most likely deepen the conflict. It would also increase the accusations that Israel denies, made by leading human rights groups, among others, that Israel has imposed a system of apartheid on Palestinians. The Gaza ceasefire has already looked rocky, but let's say it sticks and the war really is over. The consequences of 2023, 24, and 25 will roll on for many more years. Palestinians in Gaza face another generation of struggle to rebuild their lives and homes. That's assuming there is not a new, lower level, but still disastrous war. The systems of governance and security laid out in Donald Trump's Gaza plan have not been established. Hamas says it will not disarm, despite threats from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And there are the precedents of the past. Many of the Palestinians who took part in aircraft hijacks and joined armed groups to fight Israel in the late 1960s and early 70s were children when their families fled from their homes or were forced out at gunpoint by Israeli troops in 1948. Palestinians call Israel's victory that year the catastrophe. Young Palestinians today who've seen the mass killing of their families and friends and the destruction of their towns need to be offered a better and fairer future. If that doesn't happen, it's easy to see how they might end up as recruits to groups looking for revenge against Israel. I made that point to some Israeli reservists earlier in the war. They were graduate students in their 20s on a brief break before their next combat deployment with the IDF in Gaza. Never mind radicalizing the Palestinians, one of them said, they've radicalized us. He said that back on the 6th of October 2023, he'd probably have supported the two-state solution, but after what happened the next day, the killing and hostage-taking perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October, he was against it. Israel faces legal consequences. The arrest warrants for war crimes issued by the International Criminal Court against Mr. Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant still stand. The ICC also issued warrants against Hamas leaders, all of whom have since been killed by Israel. And there's the case accusing Israel of genocide at the International Court of Justice. The ICJ has already issued advice that the entire Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, Gaza, and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is illegal. Israel will continue to deny all the accusations made about the way it fought the war in Gaza. But the war has left it isolated, more dependent than ever on the United States. And here's one more consequence of 2023. Israel, Palestine, and the rest of us are in a new era, whether we like it or not.
Jeremy Bowen. Next to Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, where the grip of criminal gangs remains as tight as ever on the city's impoverished neighbourhoods. This week, Doctors Without Borders, an organisation which routinely works in some of the world's most dangerous places, announced it was closing an emergency clinic because repeated gunfire and attacks on staff made it too risky to go on, calling the decision a last resort. On a recent visit, Jasmin Dyer saw some of the ruined lives and homes which the gangs have left in their wake.
Market stalls selling clothes and SIM cards line Port-au-Prince's streets. For a city so gripped by violence, it's bustling. Schoolgirls, immaculately dressed with ribbons in their hair, make their way home in the intense heat of the day. The risk to life here is ever present, but here, in contrast to elsewhere, life goes on as best as possible. Our armoured four-wheel drive weaves slowly through the rush-hour traffic. With so many areas of Haiti's capital in ruins, the viable routes are always congested. We're on our way to Delmas 30, a neighbourhood that was once home to thousands and now lies deserted. One morning in late February, gangs attacked at dawn, ambushing residents as they slept. Rape, murder, arson, there was no limit to the horror they inflicted on their fellow Haitians. We pull up beside an abandoned supermarket to meet a group of vigilantes, civilians who are filling the security vacuum. Heavily armed, they patrol the deserted neighbourhood, trying to keep the gangs from taking control. We're introduced to Rodrigue, a man in his 60s. He's a tailor by trade. He's going back to see what's left of his home, visiting for the first time since February, and is taking us with him. We make our way through a maze of narrow alleyways. There are almost no signs of life. The neighbourhood is lined with houses blackened by fire and reduced to rubble. We run every time we reach an open space, so we're not spotted by the gangs who are positioned about 2 blocks away. After a tense 10-minute walk, we finally reach what was once Rodrigue's family home. Crumbled concrete and charred sheets of corrugated metal make it impossible to gain entry. He is bereft as he gestures towards what was once a bedroom. "This was my bedroom. That's the kids' room," he explains. "There were so many victims. People were hacked to death," he says. "They carried them out in wheelbarrows." Suddenly a gunshot rings out and the mood shifts. The vigilantes tell us it's their snipers firing warning shots. We don our helmets and decide to leave, concerned that the gangs may retaliate. Over 1 million people are now displaced in Haiti, forced to flee their homes, but it's women and children who are suffering most. 1 in 5 victims of sexual violence here is a child, and women are now reporting instances of gang rape involving multiple assailants. We make our way to a safe house across town. It's home to dozens of young women and girls. Nestled behind high walls, it is purposefully discreet. It seems quiet and peaceful here, but the gangs are never far away in a city where they now control about 90% of the territory. The house is big and open plan. The only man here works as the cook. He smiles and waves at us. Up the stairs we catch a glimpse of the bedrooms. They're sparsely decorated, with bunk beds and bright painted walls. The victims of the violence now living here are shockingly young. A girl in a blue polka dot dress dances on the balcony with her fellow residents. At 12 years old, she is slight and appears younger than her age because of malnutrition. She is the youngest survivor of rape at the house. The eldest is just 19 and tells us she was abducted by the gangs when she was 17 years old. "They raped and beat me," she says, speaking barely above a whisper. When she fell pregnant, the gang told her to have an abortion, and she refused. After being held for over 2 months, she escaped while they were fighting. Her baby daughter is almost 1 and lies asleep in her lap. And yet, despite her devastating ordeal, she is not an outlier or an anomaly. Sexual violence of the most depraved kind is a fact of life for the women of Port-au-Prince. What does the future hold for those seeking refuge within these walls, in a city where violence is both inescapable and unpredictable? This young woman and her baby daughter are 2 of the luckier ones. For now, they have a place to stay, where trained care workers support them. Thousands of others languish in camps where disease and malnutrition run rampant, longing for a life of peace, and not just survival.
Jasmin Dyer. Last month, in a ceremony presided over by Pope Leo, a London-born boy became the first millennial saint. Carlo Acutis died of leukemia, aged just 15, but in his short life, spent mainly in Italy, he built websites documenting miracles as a means of spreading Catholic teaching, and as a result became known as God's influencer. Isabella Redmayne travelled to the Italian hilltop town of Assisi, where the young saint's body lies, where she met gathering pilgrims.
The miracles aren't as good as they used to be. I'm standing outside the Cathedral of San Rufino in Assisi, central Italy. Inside is the heart of St. Carlo Acutis, the first millennial saint, who was recently canonised. It's midday. The September sun cuts mercilessly into the limestone courtyard, and, voicing this sad pronouncement on the state of modern Catholicism, a middle-aged woman frowns at me through her sunglasses. She's a pilgrim, one of the thousands who've already journeyed to Assisi to visit the new saint. They're all second-hand, she says. No stigmata, no visions. He's not, raised... She holds out her hand to mime a saint, reanimating a corpse. As a young teenager, Acutis built a website cataloguing miracles. Prospective saints must be responsible for at least 2 of their own. In 2013, 7 years after Acutis himself died from leukemia, age 15, a Brazilian boy suffering from a pancreatic defect claims to have been cured after kissing a relic of Carlo's clothing. In 2022, a Costa Rican student experienced a near-fatal brain hemorrhage. Her mother said she prayed to Carlo, and her daughter was reported to have recovered later that day. Thus, St. Carlo was canonised on the 7th of September after a 2-decade-long campaign. This is lightning speed by normal standards. The process can take centuries. Carlo's journey to sainthood involved countless Vatican interviews and examinations of his personal effects to determine whether his life exemplified heroic virtue. The required administration, travel, and medical and theological consultations can drive costs into the hundreds of thousands of euros, usually raised by the Catholic community. The Acutis family paid it all themselves. It doesn't mean he wasn't deserving, says the pilgrim, who had bemoaned the state of modern miracles. Her mouth forms a thin line. If you could, you would, you know? Carlo was born in London and grew up in Milan, the child of an insurance broker and a publishing heiress. His family had live-in staff, 2 of whom Acutis converted to Catholicism. They spent their holidays in Assisi, where he requested to be buried. More than 620,000 people visited his tomb in the first 8 months of 2025. Leaving the courtyard, I bump into an Australian family. They say they're not part of the Acutis tourist boom. We're not religious, confesses the oldest daughter sheepishly. Her mother is more forthright. We're curious. I tell them what I know about Acutis. But what did he do? Asks the father. For a moment, I'm stumped. Acutis has been called God's influencer and the patron saint of the internet. Aside from a kind personality, he's best known for his websites. It's not quite up to Assisi's St. Francis, who saw visions, communicated with animals, and founded the Franciscan order. Perhaps his tomb will hold some answers. Outside the church of Santa Maria Maggiore, visitors are corralled into a queue. We move quickly, but not quickly enough for some. A woman keeps nudging me in the back. I wonder if she's signalling superior devotion, then she muscles past to join her friends. The man who replaces her is more relaxed. He's watching the football on his phone. Inside, earthquakes have destroyed most of the fresco's distinguishing features. A pair of giant, disembodied legs loom over a golden statue of the Virgin Mary. One woman trails her hand over its toes, not glancing up from WhatsApp. At the back of the church, a hush descends. No one is texting here. St. Carlo lies encased in glass and stone, hands preserved, face covered by a lifelike silicone mask. He appears relaxed, wearing Nike sneakers and the jumper and jeans he often used to wear, replicated on merchandise for sale around the city. Worshippers kiss the tomb. Droves of people press around his body, searching for solace. Some leave tightly folded notes. I wonder what happens to them, and who clears them away. Outside, I chat to a young Brazilian woman. She came to Italy to watch her brother play in a football tournament. The 2 of them are taking a few days between matches to visit the young saint. He makes sainthood seem possible, she tells me. Like, we can do that too. We've never had a saint in modern clothes. She shrugs, smiling. We wanted to see him. It's as though she's describing popping in to visit a relative. It's a familiarity hard to imagine with any other saint. Acutis' characterization as God's influencer starts to make sense. Influencers sell familiarity. They show us their lives. Today, you can watch St. Carlo videos on YouTube, Google an interview with his mother, and read Facebook posts about him chuckling over The Simpsons. His unremarkableness is the point. He's a boy anyone can know. Many feel he is close to them and close to God. Perhaps this is miracle enough.
Isabella Redmayne. And finally, it's perhaps a bit of a cliché when you travel to the US for locals to boast of their ancestry, part English, part German, part Scots, and more often than not, part Irish. The long-standing romantic allure of Ireland has led many with Irish heritage to long for a return to their ancestral homeland, and in many cases seek to acquire its powerful passport. On a recent visit to Ireland's south coast, James Helm bumped into some transatlantic travellers and heard more about the country's enduring international appeal.
The view towards the Atlantic Ocean from my lush green hilltop was worth the effort to get there. I'd clambered up the steep steps to reach the remnants of a Bronze Age fort. The clouds had finally parted, and the sun turned the sea below from grey to glorious blue. The rolling fields and scattered farms stopped at dark, rocky outcrops where the endless ocean began. Behind me I heard voices, and I fell into conversation with a couple over from the US, a man and a woman, maybe in their early 50s, tall and smartly dressed. He was of Irish descent, he proudly told me in an American accent, over from the West Coast for a vacation to visit family here, and also to take a look at some local properties, with an eye to buying a place where they might spend a few months a year. 2 of his relatives were with them, a friendly older couple who pointed across to a valley nearby where they lived. I got two different senses of home, both of them strong. For the older couple, a lived-in and familiar reality. For their younger relative, from thousands of miles away across this great ocean and a continent, this was a place of heritage and attachment, for whom, if a suitable house was found, the bonds were about to become tighter. A few miles away, down the narrowest country lanes, lined with bright fuchsia, I went for lunch in Castle Townsend, a handsome little town with a steep main street running right down to the harbour. Mary Ann's bar, with its low-beamed ceilings and dark front room, was surprisingly busy. There I heard many more American voices, a group of a dozen or so, finishing their meal, settling the bill, and heading back to work outside. This was no busload of day-trippers, but a real slice of Hollywood. They were an advance party, the bar staff explained, preparing to shoot a film about the life of American actor James Stewart. An even bigger crew would soon descend for the filming itself. Great news for a country pub as the summer season was ending. Often, the barman told me as my own lunch arrived on the table, the American visitors who come this way are those who are trying to track down their family ties and ancestral homes. That link with Ireland, the home country, is as strong as ever for many of the Irish diaspora, scattered around the world throughout an often painful history. What then beckons them back? Well, this southwestern corner of the island of Ireland is beguilingly beautiful, and the Irish welcome, of course, is justifiably famed. But it's much more than that. There are blood ties, the desire to explore origins and heritage and to retrace the steps of ancestors, perhaps to find familiarity and certainty in an uncertain world. I was staying with a friend, Simon, himself back from London, but who spent much of his childhood around here. He had restored a lovely old place in West Cork in a rural area where his family, many of them farmers, goes back generations. He told me how he loves the landscape here, its contours and its colours. The sense of home is much more than that for him, though. He believes the Irish like to place each other and have a particular interest in families attached to a place over time. In one form or another, he said, you often get asked in Ireland who you are and who your people are. Being able to place your family and yourself helps provide a strong sense of identity, something I had watched myself as an outsider living here. I saw music legends Oasis play a huge and euphoric gig up the road in Dublin, Ireland's capital. Coming off the car ferry and about to cross the bridge over the River Liffey, the two Gallagher brothers, Noel and Liam, born in Manchester to Irish parents, looked down at me from a roadside poster. Welcome home, it read. And this past summer, other famous musicians, Ed Sheeran and Billie Eilish, also talked about their own Irish family links. I'm from the northeast of England, but lived in Dublin as BBC correspondent for many years, with two of our sons born there. It's a place I love, and Irish friends extend their welcome home to me whenever I return. In Ireland, going away, as many of the sons and daughters of my friends still do to start jobs and make their lives, has happened over centuries. So too then has going home, to the familiar and the meaningful. That can mean visiting loved ones in a familiar place, or playing music to adoring crowds, or, for some, buying a second home back amongst relatives in a beautiful spot beside the ocean.
James Helm, and that's all for today, but you can hear more dispatches from around the world on BBC Sounds. We'll be back again next Saturday morning.